Millions of wrestling fans, like myself, all around the world, were shocked and saddened to find out about the passing of one of the legends of professional wrestling, the Ultimate Warrior, this week. You know, he was an individual that moved a lot of people, that had a profound effect on a lot of people, such as myself, um, especially kids of my generation. And he left a legacy and a lasting impact on millions of us, millions of people just like me all around the world. And it was a hard blow, and it makes you feel many different things inside. But one sad thing that I knew was going to be an inevitable truth was that once this was announced that the Ultimate Warrior had passed away, and everybody was going to rush to the conclusion instantly, whether there's evidence or not at this particular moment that it was a massive heart attack, that I knew there were going to be some morality police and some justice crusaders in the national media with their anti-professional wrestling bias that were going to seize upon this opportunity, seize upon this moment to once again crusade against professional wrestling and the rampant drug use in professional wrestling today. Now look, if I sat there and told you that drug use wasn't a problem in professional wrestling for many years, I'd be lying to you. It was. For many years, steroid abuse was rampant. Painkiller abuse was rampant. The use of recreational drugs, rampant. Nobody denies that. And the sad truth of the matter is, as much of a fan as I was of the Ultimate Warrior, and as much as he impacted my life as a child, this is a man that was an admitted steroid user for many years. And, in some ways, maybe ultimately his chickens eventually came home to roost. It's sad, it's tragic, but such is life sometimes. All those years on the road, all those years working through all those injuries, all those years using those steroids to, work on your body because that was your money making tool back then. That's how you made a living. Eventually, all that abuse and all that damage does catch up with you eventually. It's sad, but that is the reality. But this is also not necessarily anything new, and this is not something that has just become an instant revelation. People have been talking about this with professional wrestling for the past 20, 25, maybe even 30 years. So I still don't get how it becomes such a huge story, not in the sense that an individual passes away that was a big star like the Ultimate Warrior, but how it becomes such a big story that yet another wrestler seemingly has passed away before their time, but let alone it does. And there are those certain people that you can rely upon in the national media to sit there and take any opportunity they can to create a sensationalistic story out of nothing in order to capitalize on the controversy that ultimately creates cash. You see networks do this on cable. You do. They're called Fox News and MSNBC and CNN, all scuzzbucket organizations that should be shut down. They are corporate entities that all they care about is creating sensationalistic headlines. Damn the facts, damn the truths, damn the news, damn real hard-hitting investigative journalism. We're going to create sensationalistic headlines because, again, those controversies create cash, and corporations love cash. Well, it also isn't surprising to me that one of the single biggest disgraces in the national media today, Nancy Grace, used this opportunity, used this moment to stand on her feminist, guilty until proven innocent, psycho cow pulpit and tried to hammer home this point once again, grind this axe against professional wrestling. It's like she once dated a professional wrestler 30 years ago and the guy dumped her and she's never forgiven him ever since. And as a result, it seems like she's never going to give an inch to professional wrestling, and every chance she gets, instead of ever talking anything good about professional wrestling, all she's ever going to focus on is negative and bad. Not surprising, but disappointing nonetheless. So she sat there the other night on her show, had DDP on, had some other people on, and it was just psychobabble trash. I'm sitting there looking at her the whole time. I'm like, she looks like Miss Piggy, and I'm wondering where Kermit the Frog went. She must have got hungry for some frog legs. I'm serious. At some point in time, enough is enough. And I have to truly question, I have to truly wonder why somebody like a Nancy Grace is continuously allowed to sit there and continue to be allowed to sit on her bully pulpit when more often than not she is dead wrong, when more often than not she doesn't care about getting things right, she doesn't care about finding the truth, she doesn't care about facts, she doesn't care what the evidence says. It's whatever she wants to believe with her biases, her agendas, her preconceived notions, and that's it. And the sick thing is her employer continues to put up with it because controversy creates cash. And apparently Nancy Grace, the big disgrace that she is to national media here in this country, creates a lot of controversy due to her sensationalistic style and her sensationalistic headlines, and sure creates a lot of cash. But you know, I've got a question for Nancy Grace. All the accusing you do of others, and all the things that you've done over the years to try and sit on your bully pulpit and speak down to people and put your biases out there and get your own agenda out there, when is it time for your chickens to come home to roost? When is it going to be your time that you're held to task and you're held accountable for all the hot garbage that's spewed out of your shit chute over the years? Holy hell. Now keep in mind, when we're talking about Nancy Grace, this is somebody that was once a prosecutor for over a decade. In fact, such a great prosecutor that on more than one occasion, the Supreme Court of Georgia questioned her ethics and questioned the way that she did her job in the prosecutor's office. Talking about disregarding evidence and the way that she conducted herself, questioning the way that she conducted her closing arguments, making invalid comparisons to murders and rapes, etc. But of course, Nancy Grace will never own up to any of that, and she'll never be held accountable to that. Nancy Grace, do you remember Richard Ricci? This was the person that you instantly labeled as the kidnapper of Elizabeth Smart. You didn't care what the facts suggested. You didn't care what evidence there was. You didn't care what Richard Ricci or anybody else said. You just ultimately knew that Richard Ricci was the guy. Typical of a prosecutor. You don't care about justice for victims. Let's make this perfectly clear right here, right now. Justice for victims is finding the right person that committed the crime and bringing them to justice. Justice is not sitting there and finding the first sucker or lackey that you could slack this on and then ramming it through the system and putting them away. That's not justice. But according to Nancy Grace, it is. But it's funny. After all of her insistence, and even as evidence started to come out that didn't support her, and just flat out said that Richard Ricci wasn't the person that kidnapped Elizabeth Smart, she didn't care. She never apologized for it. She tried to spin from it. She tried to make excuses for it. And that's sad and pathetic. She sat there and implied, well, he created this problem because he was an ex-con. So basically what you're telling me is millions of people all around this country that at one point in time have gotten themselves into trouble and have maybe done prison time and went through the process of being rehabilitated to come back and try to be productive members of society 15, 20 years later. If something happens, they're instantly a suspect because windbags like you sit there and say they are. They brought it upon themselves, right? Get the hell out of here. Nancy Grace, do you remember Crystal Mangum? You should, because back in 2006, you were 100% damn cunt certain that she was a victim of rape and that the 3 Duke lacrosse players were guilty as hell. And the language you used at that time and the fact that you didn't care because, again, you were coming from a pro-feminism, pro-prosecutor, anti-innocent until proven guilty bias and agenda. You didn't care what the facts were. You didn't care what the evidence suggested. You didn't care what the truth was. You sat there and went right along with that freaking windbag Mike Nifong, the district attorney there, who, by the way, eventually was disbarred due to prosecutorial misconduct, something that should be right up your wheelhouse, Nancy Grace. You sat there and stuck up for this woman, and you said she was a victim, even though she apparently was a person that believed in accusing everybody of rape. She was a serial rape accuser. She had other issues. She had worked in prostitution. She was a drug abuser. It's funny, though, even after the charges were eventually dropped against the 3 Duke lacrosse players, Nancy Grace was never held to task. Nancy Grace never had to be held accountable. Nancy Grace never sat there and made any statements to say that she was wrong or to correct the record or clear the air or anything like that. She just sat there because it was a sensationalistic thing to do to create controversy, which would hopefully create cash for her Miss Piggy pockets. She decided, by God, that when the announcement came, that she was going to take the night off and she was going to be a coward and let somebody else make the announcement, and then she dropped the subject. But it's funny now, a few years later, isn't it, Nancy Grace? That Crystal Mangum, the same person that you insisted several years ago was just an innocent victim, is now serving time in prison for murdering her boyfriend. But again, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, she was the victim, and the 3 Duke lacrosse players, they were guilty. And it was institutional racism, and it was obviously a male-dominated system that was trying to sit there and get one over on womankind yet again. Get the fuck out of here, you psycho cow. Remember Melinda Duckett? I don't even really need to go into it. You know, whether she did the crime or not, I don't know where Nancy Grace got off talking to a guest like that in such a disrespectful manner. Where did you feel that was going to be productive? Yeah, there's a point in time where maybe she was a prime suspect and you need to ask those tough questions. But shouldn't those tough questions first and foremost be left to the police? It's not the last time, sadly, that somebody that appeared on Nancy Grace's show shortly afterwards committed suicide. That's really sad, isn't it? That's really, really sad. What is it, Tony Annette Medrano? That name ring a bell, Nancy Grace? You did it to her, too. And then recently you had some outrageously hilarious comments talking about people that supported the legalization of marijuana were, among other things, fat and lazy. And anybody that disagreed with you was sitting on their couch, fat and lazy, eating Cheetos and whatever. Now, all the while, you seem to have no problem with things like alcohol and tobacco, or cigarettes, I should say, that are much more addictive. And this is scientifically proven. And much more scientifically proven to lead to cancer and eventual death, as alcohol and cigarettes are. Marijuana is not. But again, because it's a sensationalistic thing to do, truth be damned, evidence be damned, facts be damned. Nancy Grace is going to believe her way. It's her way or the highway. You either strap up and get on board or you get the hell out of the way, because otherwise she's going to bowl you over with her bell cow cycle dribble. I guess ultimately, here's my thing for a Nancy Grace. You're going to sit there and try and use somebody's death, to capitalize off it for your own sick, sadistic gains. What type of person are you? How sick are you? How twisted are you? Do you not realize that the Ultimate Warrior had a wife, 2 daughters, family, friends, millions of fans around the world? Couldn't this been one of these times where you could have sat there and just laid off? No. Not for a blabbering bell cow like you. You just couldn't do that. But again, expecting integrity out of a Nancy Grace, I should know better. I mean, this is the same person that used the murder of her fiancé in 1979 as a rallying cry for her career for the next 35 years, that sat there and embellished and flat out lied about details of the case for years to make her point, to fit her bias, to fit her agenda. What type of person does that? What type of person embellishes details and lies about what happened in their fiancé's death? That's sick. That's twisted. And that is ultimately the disgrace of Nancy Grace. Now, Nancy Grace, I realize you probably sit there and think you are God's greatest gift to journalism, but you are anything but. You are the lowest of the low, and there is no question about it, and I don't think anybody with a sane mind would dispute that. I would love to debate you on this topic. I would love to talk to you about some of the other hot garbage you've done over the years. What do you want to bet that you'd quickly back off? You would try to talk over me very loudly because you know you would have nothing. I am tired of people like Nancy Grace being allowed to sit on their bully pulpits and say whatever the hell they want and never be held accountable for anything that they say or anything that they do. It's not a truth or consequences thing. It's capitalizing on controversy that creates cash. It's sensationalism rules. People over the years have thought things like Morton Downey Jr. was trash journalism, or Jerry Springer, or Geraldo Rivera were trash TV, or Phil Donahue was trash TV. No. The epitome of trash TV in the United States of America is easily, and it's not even close, Nancy Grace. I realize this may be a bitter pill for some Nancy Grace supporters to swallow, and I know this would be a bitter pill for Nancy Grace to swallow herself. But you'll be, what, 54 or 55 years old this year, something like that? Let's compare your legacy to the Ultimate Warrior. You, Nancy Grace, have profited off of the pain and misery of others for many years. First, via being a prosecutor, where you didn't care if somebody actually did do it or not. You just find your first lackey, your first fall boy, your first sucker, and it was all about locking them up and making yourself look good. For years in your work in the media, you have profited off of the pain and misery and suffering of others, and you have gotten great joy off of that. Whereas the Ultimate Warrior, this is a man that was a bodybuilder, worked very hard to become what he became, sat there, and within 5 years, he started off at the very bottom of professional wrestling, and 5 years later, by 1990, he was the biggest star, or one of the biggest stars in the entire world of professional wrestling. He was main eventing WrestleMania 6 in front of over 60,000 people at the Toronto Skydome in 5 years. He didn't sit there and profit off of other people's pain and misery. He didn't sit there and stand on a bully pulpit. You know what he did? He went out there, he busted his ass, and he made his own way, and he made his own living, and he worked hard for what he got, unlike you psycho wench of a cow, Nancy Grace. He was a loving husband. He was a loving father. He was an individual that was loved by millions of fans all around the world. And you know what? Maybe that's ultimately what it is. Maybe, Nancy Grace, you just don't like the fact that people that you don't understand, that people that you don't get, like the Ultimate Warrior, have left a longer lasting positive impression on millions of people's lives all around the world than anything you could ever hope or dream to do. Maybe that's what it is. But it's sick, and it's disgraceful. And what else would I expect out of the ultimate disgrace of American journalism than Nancy Grace? Get a clue, get a life, get a different job, you psycho wench. Everybody's tired of hearing from you. Thank you.